My guest today is Dr. Lisa Sturtevant, Chief Economist for Bright MLS. Lisa, I'm really excited that we could finally make this happen and have you on the podcast. We had a little bit of technical difficulties getting on here today. How's it going down in Maryland?
That's great, Jason. Thank you so much for the chance to chat with you today. There's so much going on in the market. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you and everyone at your brokerage.
Well, there definitely is. And I know you're always busy and in demand. So I appreciate you taking some time to help us make sense out of what we're currently seeing in the housing market today. So, the truth is, before we get started, that I've wanted to have you on the podcast for quite some time now. So, I'm really glad that we can finally make this happen. And honestly, I can't think of a better time to have you on because we have a whole lot of vibes right now happening in the marketplace, for a lack of a better term, both good and bad. And you have the changes coming, with the NAR settlement our way. We have some, lukewarm jobs reports recently that we've kind of just dug into, but we may have some good news on the interest rate front in the days ahead. So it's kind of a mixed bag. And you are also typically seeing some seasonality happening in the real estate market right now. And some of the younger agents out there may have never experienced this before in their entire careers. So that's why we need you on to set us straight with some good old emotionless. All right.
Yeah.
So if we can, I want to start out with a wide lens and zoom out to the macro level on where we are in our footprint in terms of sales, listings, inventory, all that good stuff in comparison to where we were in the recent past. So if I can, what are you seeing happen in the market right now that's standing out to you?
Yeah, I think when you look across the market, first of all, I want to say there's a lot of vibes out there. I'm going to steal that. I kind of love that idea that there's just so many different things coming at us. And it's really a great chance to kind of step back and say, okay, well, what are the facts out there? What are we really seeing when we look at the data? And when we do look at what's going on in the housing market through the first 7 months of 2024, we're kind of, I don't think, where we expected we would be, right? When we thought about where the market would be in 2024 at the end of last year, the expectations were we were going to have a much busier market than 2023. 2023 was a 30-year low for transactions nationally as well as in the Philly metro. But what we've seen actually is we're tracking still through the first 7 months, transactions are tracking lower than they were last year. And that surprises me. I thought we'd be up. And the primary reason is because mortgage rates didn't come down like we expected. But I think there's a lot to look forward to in the second half of the year. But transactions lower than we were, home prices still rising, hitting record levels across the Philadelphia metro area, New Jersey suburbs really strong, Philly suburbs really strong, but also the city itself still seeing price growth. And then the third trend that we're seeing really is, and good news for buyers, good news, I think, just for the market generally, inventory up 18-20% year over year across the Philadelphia metro area. Before we get too excited about that, still about half of where we were before the pandemic, but an increase in new listing activity is a good sign. So this is just kind of some of the trends that we're seeing in the market as we head into the end of summer here.
I'm definitely seeing more inventory out there. There's absolutely no doubt about it. I think this year also I've been on more home inspections, just anecdotally. I've been on more home inspections this year than I probably have been in the past 3 years combined.
Yeah.
So we are seeing the buyers claw back a little bit of leverage. I will say that, we're still seeing, like you said, home prices are still rising. I see that in my marketplace, but in a lot of cases, it's tempered, I guess you could say, how far over the
Mm,
prices are going right now. Now,
sure.
earlier this year, it was still a kind of a feeding frenzy. That may be a result of the seasonality that we're seeing right now. And of course, there's exceptions to every rule. I just found out last night that I did not get my offer accepted on a property that had, I believe, 6 or 7 offers
Yep.
on it. I anticipated probably would have went at least $50,000 over
Yeah,
asking.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
there are exceptions here, but there is more wiggle room right now to make a deal if you're on the buying side. And I think the data kind of backs that up in what you're saying with units being down, inventory being up a little bit. So, I wanted to ask you that question to start because it may give us some clues as to where we're heading down the road from here. Interest rates obviously are going to play a part in my next question. So, what is your best guess as to where we are heading the rest of the year and then into 2025? Obviously, interest rates are going to be a big part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we had hoped at the end of last year that mortgage rates were going to begin to fall in 2024. But as you know, inflation remained higher than the Fed wanted. The labor market remained really strong. All expectations are that mortgage rates are going to come down as we head into the second half, as we're in the second half of this year. The Federal Reserve is all but certain to cut interest rates in September. Don't expect a big drop in mortgage rates after the September rate cut. It's already baked in. You can already start to see that mortgage rates have been falling for the last 3 weeks. We're still at over 6.8% according to Freddie Mac, and of course it varies depending on your lender and your financial situation. But I expect a steady decline in the rate on a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, but we're still going to be at 6.5% by the end of the year. That's the new normal. For agents that have only been in the market since the pandemic, there is no return to the 3% mortgage rate, not in our lifetime. And as we head into 2025, I expect we're going to stay in the sixes. And I do think that the sixes are the new normal, and it has less and less to do with the Federal Reserve and more to do with other factors like the federal debt and bonds being issued to pay down interest on the debt, mortgage-backed securities competing with those bonds. The return then has to remain a little bit higher, which is why a big reason why we'll see rates, I think, in the 6%. So I think for folks who are waiting for rates to come down to buy, there will be lower rates later in the fall and then to the winter. For folks waiting until rates fall to where they were during the pandemic, that is a non-starter for just a wide variety of reasons.
I feel really bad for those people. I really do. I
Yeah,
mean, honestly, especially with younger
yeah.
buyers out there who typically are not as financially as secure as some of our older buyers, being a first-time home buyer and spending, say, $600,000 on a property, and then looking at a mortgage payment right now, even with 20% down, being $4,000 a month. I mean, that is a tall task. And
Yeah.
yeah, do you want to say something?
Well, it just what we're seeing and I hate to use the phrase the post-pandemic housing market, it's so overused, but as we come out into like a renormalization or a rebalancing of the housing market, there have been some real winners and losers out there. If you bought a home during the pandemic, if you refinanced a home during the pandemic, if you are a homeowner, uh, you have record levels of equity in your home right now, you're a winner, right? And there are lots of us who benefited from those super low mortgage rates. But if you are just trying to get into homeownership now, it's not easy. And even with rates coming down, affordability is still the biggest challenge for first-time buyers, more moderate income buyers. And unfortunately, that's not going to change a lot over the next few years. It's really going to be a persistent challenge, I think, to be a first-time home buyer simply because inventory is just still so low.
So as an economist, and that is the biggest question always in my mind is affordability.
Mm.
And so as an economist, what do you see? Is there any answer to that? I mean, beyond new construction starts and making it more affordable to build housing, changing zoning laws, things of that nature. Is there anything just in your mind, like if I'm asking you, Lisa, like what can we do about this?
Mhm.
What do you see as an economist? Like, is there an answer or a solution in your mind to the affordability problem?
Supply is the whole ballgame. I mean, we can talk about other things around the fringes, but it's like it's all about supply. So there is a demographic and cyclical trend in the supply side that'll work itself out in the next decade. And what I mean by that is that as the aging of the baby boomers sort of move on, in the 2030s, we will see a much better inventory picture for first-time buyers. Until then, what we're seeing for people who are first-time buyers, we're seeing uh, young adults getting assistance from their parents who may be able to tap equity in their home to provide to their children to purchase. We're seeing people in our market, first-time home buyers who are more interested in buying a home with a rental stream, whether it's an Airbnb room they can let out or buying a duplex. We're seeing people who are teaming up with people who aren't getting married, maybe, or having kids, but they're teaming up with friends or roommates to purchase a home. It's become a little bit more creative. And the last thing we've been seeing is, for some people, remote work is still a possibility. So we're seeing people look a little further out than they might have. But all those things are sort of just, it's like on the fringes, and the supply is really the whole ballgame.
Yeah, people are getting creative out there. We see multi-generational purchases as well, more so today. And you and I were having a conversation actually yesterday about just what the psychology of
Yeah,
everything, right? We talked about vibes earlier.
yeah,
It seems like it's just a weird market that everything kind of feels slightly off, and that could be
yeah,
for a variety of reasons. I mean, obviously, we're going through a lot of change right now,
yeah,
and so maybe that has a lot to do with it. But can you speak to the psychology of
yeah,
what people are feeling? You were excited about this, that to talk
yeah.
about the psychology a little bit and how it may affect what you see as an economist. Does consumer sentiment
Mhm.
and the perception often become the reality in the data?
Mm. That's a really interesting way to think about it. Is we pay a lot of attention to the economic data. We pay a lot of attention to the financial decision making when it comes to buying and selling a home. But as I've said before, like, buying and selling a home is more psychological or emotional than it is financial. And let's just talk about one thing in particular that I really think a lot about. Is we heard a lot about rate lock, right? That sellers weren't going to sell their homes because they don't want to give up their super low mortgage rate. Totally get it. I've done the math. Why would anybody do that? But the fact of the matter is, life happens, right? People get married, people have additional kids. That two-bedroom house with two kids was fine, but now you have a third kid on the way, and I don't care if I have to double my mortgage rate. Oh, and by the way, I have a ton of equity to roll into the purchase of my next home, so I can, in essence, sort of buy down that mortgage rate. So I don't think rate lock is as big a deal as it has been made out to be, because I do think these emotional and psychological reasons for moving are really prompting more listing activity. That's why we're seeing inventory rise. On the buy side, I think we should really be paying attention to that consumer sentiment measure you just mentioned. I get asked a lot about whether the presidential election is going to have an impact on the housing market, and you look back at 40 years of data, and the answer is no. But I don't know. This time feels different. People are nervous. They're uncertain. There's been chaos in recent presidential elections, and so I think all of those things are weighing on folks. They see the stock market drop dramatically this week. Even if you don't have investments big time in the stock market, you have your 401k, but I think people may be uncertain. And I think that even if we see strong job numbers, even if we see the Fed drop interest rates, I think people may still be holding back a little bit if they are feeling uncomfortable. And that consumer sentiment, I think, number is really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I feel like we go through mood swings,
Totally.
and our mood swings are kind of like more violent nowadays.
Totally.
I hate to use that terminology. You did say that you get asked about politics a lot, and I was going to mention, I hate talking about politics. I'd probably rather put my hand in a blender than to talk about politics with anybody. Um, but you said historically it doesn't make a difference, but who knows, this time around, is
Yeah.
there a level of just a guessing game to some of these things as well, because we're in a territory where we may have not been before as a country?
Yeah, I think that's part of what's been so challenging. Is we're trying to use the old rules about the housing market to predict where we're headed. And I mean, that's the best that we've been able to do, right? That's what economic forecasters do. They look at the past in order to predict the future. But I do think that we need to be asking ourselves a different question. I think we need to ask, what is the new normal in the housing market? What are the factors that are going to affect people in the next 18 to 24 months, let's say, that may be different than they were in whatever we're going to call it, a typical housing market? And I do think people are just coming off this roller coaster ride emotionally and financially of the pandemic, and they're going to react to different things. And if there is uncertainty, let's say around the presidential election, it's not about policy. It's not about which candidate's better for me as a home buyer or seller. It's just, do we have certainty going forward? And I think that's where people are, I think, a little bit nervous.
I think it's just like any big industry. They want certainty.
Yes.
Consumers want certainty. They want to know what's, the stability of everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the fluctuations are happening and we get nervous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I want to drill down a little bit further into that Philly metro
Yeah.
area because I know our agents listening are now when I say Philly metro area, I'm talking about Jersey, I'm talking about Delaware, I'm talking about PA, I'm talking about the city. To our friends in North Jersey and Central Jersey that are more the New York area, I want to make sure that we touch upon that as well. So what are you seeing? In our area specifically, our Bright footprint is pretty large,
Yep.
encompasses obviously other cities outside of Philadelphia and the metro region. So, are there any trends happening specifically in our
Yeah.
region that kind of are different from everything else? Or are you seeing kind of the same thing across the board in our entire footprint?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And two quick things before we get into the numbers. I so appreciate you asking this because a lot of the coverage that prospective home buyers and sellers are seeing, a lot of what consumers are reading about is in national media that's talking about the national housing market, which is really driven by stories about California, about Texas, about places that have basically nothing to do with the Philadelphia metro area. Because there are places in Florida where home prices are declining pretty rapidly right now. There are places in California where homes are selling at, the median price is 15 times the median household income. In the Philadelphia market, in the Mid-Atlantic more generally, we have been, for lack of this is not a pejorative word really, but it's like we're sort of a vanilla market. We don't have huge swings up and down. And in the Philadelphia market in particular, even compared to Baltimore and DC, which are the other two major markets in the Bright footprint, the Philadelphia market has been super strong. And I think during the pandemic, a lot of that was driven by folks perhaps moving from higher cost New York Metro down to the Philadelphia metro area in higher numbers than they had before, pushing home prices up, really driving demand. But home prices are still rising quite quickly, particularly in the suburbs, but like I said, even in the city. And the thing that's been a little bit different has really been the consistency in that strong price growth. Prices dipped in DC for a bit, prices have been a little bit soft in Baltimore. Prices are still very, very strong and going up in the Philly metro. The one thing I will say when you look across is, and forgive me for naming the geographies incorrectly, on the New Jersey side of the metro, we're actually starting to see an uptick in our data of the number of contracts falling through. We're starting to track the fall through rates for contracts, still lower than before the pandemic, but we're starting to see in those markets a little bit of an uptick in fall throughs, but on the Philly suburb sides, not seeing the same pattern. So I think as we go into the second half of the year, it's going to be really important to look at your very local market because things are happening differently. And just as a plug at Bright, we put out a report for the Philadelphia metro area. We break everything down by county, which is at least, I mean, sometimes you need to go even further, but it's at least a one-stop shop to see where things are playing out a little bit differently across the region.
So with those fall throughs, just out of curiosity, do you see any particular reason as to why that's happening? Are there more home inspections happening in New
Yeah.
Jersey? Are there more buyer's remorse kind of deals
Yeah.
here where it's a hotter market, so then you may see cancellations on a contract because all of a sudden people are like, what did I just do?
Yeah.
Is there any particular reason that you're seeing for that?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that because when you mentioned home inspections earlier in the conversation, that's what prompted me to bring up the fall through rate. We do a monthly survey of our subscribers who've worked with a buyer or seller in the last month, and we ask them the question. The primary reason that contracts are falling through has to do with financing falling through. And that shouldn't be, that's not super surprising, right? Because rates have hit 7%, home prices are still rising. But the next biggest reason is about inspections, is about something coming up in a home inspection that has caused the buyer to pull back. And that we weren't seeing that during the pandemic, right? Because home inspections were basically non-existent. And so between those two reasons, financing and home inspections, those have been the drivers. And let me be clear too, the fall through rates are higher in more moderately priced markets, which that's the financing piece. That's like when we're going out to central PA where home prices and incomes are a little bit lower, we're actually seeing the fall through rates higher out that way because income and the income to debt ratio and the ability to get financing is harder for those places where incomes are a little bit lower.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense to me because especially when you're talking about DTI and people wanting so badly to make the dream of home ownership happen, they're putting everything on the line. I can envision them like maxing out everything in
Yep.
order to try and get a property and then unfortunately them not qualifying in certain cases. And
Yep.
so, that's the shame of kind of where we are right now. I wanted to ask you just a kind of a question for you as an economist. I wanted to ask you a question that probably you don't get asked
Okay.
that much because
Cool.
you're all about the data. But what's the one thing about being an economist that you wake up excited about every day? Like what excites you as an economist? Because I will tell you, Lisa, like with all due respect, I am probably the antithesis of a numbers person.
Sure.
So I always like to just psychology on your end. Like, what excites you about being an economist?
It's so interesting. I'm like, that's such a cool question. Look, I am a numbers person. Let's be very clear. I love the numbers. I was a math major. It's all good. But the reason why the definition of being an economist or what it means to be an economist is to think about, when you think about a microeconomist, not a economy of the GDP and all that stuff, but when economic theory is really about people making decisions under constraint. That sounds really technical, but every single day in our lives, we are making decisions and trade-offs between things. And that is what I like to think about. So even something as simple as, this is a kind of a silly example, but I need to go pick up a pair of glasses that I ordered. Do I go today, or would it be more efficient if I went on the way to drop my kid off from camp in the morning when I don't have? So it's this idea of a trade-off and what is more efficient for me. Like, and so this idea of, I think about that stuff, Jason, all day. Like, not just about housing, but about like trade-offs. And then the things that we value are reflected in the trade-offs that we make, right? And I think when you bring that back to housing, I feel like we see trade-offs all the time in neighborhood or characteristics or property characteristics or the agent we want to work with. And I think in this day and age, understanding how people are valuing things through the trade-offs they're making, that's super interesting. And I think it's really valuable for agents to think about as they're trying to demonstrate their value, right, to potential home buyers. What are we willing what are we willing to part with to get what we value? And I think that is what gets me excited and jumping out of bed every day to dig into my spreadsheets, but with this lens of like how human beings make decisions, given we can't have everything, right?
That's fascinating to me. I love that. Wait, would you say that you lead an efficient life if you're so into efficiencies?
I to a fault. I do. I do. I am I'm not joking. Like on when I am cooking dinner, it is a thought exercise of what thing comes first so that it can all be done. And I feel like if I wasn't an economist, I would be like in logistics. I'm very fascinated about things moving efficiently through a process. That said, let me just one anecdote just to kind of take the opposite side. We also bought the home that I'm in now in 2022 when mortgage rates hit 7% for the first time after them being so low for so long. That doesn't sound like the financially smart decision, but that is just a testament to the fact that in this world of buying and selling a home, it is not always about the numbers and what's most efficient or most maximizing your utility. Sometimes it's just what emotion causes you to do.
So much of what we do is emotion driven, you know. So I wanted to circle back on the jobs report,
Yeah.
and obviously, you know, we talked about the stock market. We won't get into that, but obviously the dip in the stock market
Yep.
recently. Do you feel as an economist and playing, you know, backseat driver here, do you feel like as an economist the Fed waited too long to cut interest rates?
Yes.
That
Shall
was
I
a very
elaborate?
simple answer. Yes, please
I
do.
think and look, it's I'm not alone in that thought. I think the focus of the Federal Reserve on inflation hitting that 2% target was really an example of using the old rules to make decisions in an economy and a housing market that look very different than anything we've seen before. And we know that housing plays an outside role in the inflation measure. We know that it lags. We know that if you removed housing from the measure of inflation, we've been below 2% for months, right? And so the challenge is none of that has been really as important in prior cycles where the central bank has had to make decisions about rate cuts or rate increases. And so I feel like it was a missed opportunity to think about the new era that we're in. And I think we're going to be okay. I don't think we're going to end up in an economic recession. I think we would have been okay to cut rates earlier. I do hope that when the Federal Reserve meets in September, it's a percentage point cut, not a quarter, and that they cut again in the second half when they meet again in the second half of the year. But I think that's part of the challenge, right? We're in this new environment, and I think that just the ironic thing is, as we talked about earlier, the one thing to make housing costs come down is more supply. And when it comes to building new homes, it is much higher to build new homes when interest rates are high. So you're like playing against yourself. You want to bring that housing measure and the inflation rate down, but you're keeping rates high, which makes it too hard to build housing, which keeps housing costs high. And I feel like that is part of the problem of waiting as long as they have. But like I said, I still think the risk of an economic recession is pretty low. I do think we'll probably see 2 rate cuts in the second half of the year. And I think as we head into 2025, more of a kind of a normal transition.
Well, I know as agents, we can't wait for that because that's one less thing that we have to worry about
Yeah.
right now,
Yeah.
which is always nice.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
before I let you get out of here, I got one last question, and
Yeah.
this is you know, this is completely random without putting any research into it whatsoever. But I was just thinking, what in your mind is the better institution of higher learning? Is it George Mason University? Or is it the University of Maryland?
Oh man, I am gonna
For no specific reason what.
well, and honestly, I'm gonna punt on both of them, and I'm gonna go with Wake Forest University, where
Ah,
I did my undergraduate work, where I went to college undergrad. And the only reason for that is, look, when your undergraduate college mascot is the Demon Deacon, I mean, you can't go much better than that. And when you go to college with Tim Duncan, who goes on to be one of the best NBA players in the country, you really got to go back to you really. And
wow,
frankly,
you threw me for a loop with that. I
I
thought I was
well,
going to have you cornered with that
no,
question.
no, don't. You're never gonna. It's like I live in the Washington, D.C. area and I live in Maryland now, but I lived in Virginia forever. You don't ask me which one I like better. That's not, you don't want to get into that. That's dangerous territory.
That's funny because that was my follow-up question. Because what I was going to ask you, I was literally going to end with what state is the best out of these three:
Oh,
Vermont,
oh.
Maryland, or Virginia?
Man, well, because I don't want to get myself in trouble here with my local folks. I was the chief economist with Virginia Realtors for a while, so I have a lot of history with Virginia. I've only lived in Maryland for a little while now, but look, I'm going to have to go Vermont. Green Mountain State. We have 6 seasons in Vermont. I don't know if you know that. The 4 regular ones, we have mud season in the spring. We have stick season in between fall and winter. Where else can you get such variety in the weather. So
I
I'm
don't
gonna
know.
go
I
for
don't know
lemon.
if I want to know what stick season it's all about, right? I just think of the maple syrup and
Yeah,
like the Green Mountain area. That's
yeah,
what I think of.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What is stick season?
It is probably one of the less attractive seasons in the state where it's right after all the beautiful leaves have come down, but before the snow has fallen. So it's just these sticks of trees with no leaves and no snow. And that is sticks. There's a popular song out on the radio right now about the season of the sticks in Vermont.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna have to look into that one. So, well, Lisa, I really, really appreciate you doing this. It's a pleasure to get to know you a little bit. And hopefully this will not be our last meeting.
Yeah.
I would love to have you back at some point in time if you'd be willing to do so. Thank you for all your hard work for us. Information is great. The data is great. Look forward to reading all those reports when they come out on Bright. So, thanks again for doing this.
Jason,
Thanks for
thank
your time.
you. Yeah, thank you. And good luck with the rest of your year. And I hope to connect with you again soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Lisa. Have a good
Thanks.
day.
Okay. Bye.